It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Huw Edwards has been named by his wife as the BBC presenter accused of paying a teenager for explicit pictures. The Met Police say there is no criminal investigation, as it's confirmed the veteran TV host is in hospital with serious mental health issues. Also tonight, the UK's Defence Secretary suggests Ukraine should show more gratitude for the help it's received. President Zelensky tells Sky News he is grateful.
We are grateful to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is our partner.
The first asylum seekers arrive at an RAF base in Essex. We see inside the site, which could be home to 1,500 people. A warning that Europe could be sweltering through record-breaking temperatures by the end of the week. And rolling out the pink carpet for the Barbie premiere, we look at how the popular figure has changed over time.
Barbie Land feels like a female utopia, but you do, by the end of the film, see the flaw in that.
And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, good evening. After days of talking about an unnamed BBC presenter at the centre of allegations around paying a teenager for sexually explicit pictures, tonight that presenter has been named as Huw Edwards. The revelation was made by his wife on behalf of the BBC News host shortly after the Met Police said there was no indication that a criminal offence had been committed. The story began at the weekend in the Sun newspaper, alleging that Huw Edwards had paid a young person £35,000 for the photos. Tonight, the Sun has responded, saying the claims published were very serious and they have no plans to publish any further allegations. Sky's home editor Jason Farrell has tonight's first report.
Tonight at 10,
the BBC's most senior news anchor, one of their highest-paid stars, Huw Edwards, is among the most recognisable faces of the corporation and has been for more than 30 years. There was growing pressure to reveal that he was the mystery presenter at the centre of allegations in the Sun newspaper. And it was his wife, Vicky Flind, who told the world, saying, "I am making this statement on behalf of my husband, Huw Edwards, after what have been 5 extremely difficult days for our family. I'm doing this primarily out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect our children." Huw is suffering from serious mental health issues. As is well documented, he has been treated for severe depression in recent years. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care, where he'll stay for the foreseeable future. It came almost immediately after the Met Police said they had found no evidence of criminality and would be taking no further action against Mr. Edwards. It left one former wrongly accused man feeling nothing but sympathy.
He is in hospital. He is not personally able to speak for himself. I'm sure a time will come when, if he wishes, and he should not be forced, then he will respond. But not now. Now is the time to respect him and what he's done for the BBC in the past, his wife, who has stuck by him, his family and his children.
But the end of the police inquiry doesn't end the questions. This comes back to the BBC to decide whether this is merely gossip about a man's private life or whether his actions are disreputable and threaten his career. But the BBC will have to balance a duty of care to a sick employee with the need to investigate the remaining allegations, some separate to those made in the Sun newspaper concerning his behaviour towards some young people and an allegation he broke lockdown rules.
I don't think it's any job of a broadcaster to investigate the private life of its employees. If you've got 22,000 employees, as the BBC does have, there will be some strange and aberrant and inappropriate behaviour and no doubt some criminality at times. That is not the BBC's issue.
In a memo to staff, the Director General said they will continue to assess the case and follow due process. In her statement, Huw Edwards' wife said he would, when recovered, address the allegations. And he apologised for the distress caused to his colleagues.
I just think this thing has got to stop.
Presenters like Jeremy Vine, who'd been wrongly accused of being the mystery presenter. The Sun said it had no plans to publish further allegations, but will provide BBC investigators with a dossier containing more allegations, including some from BBC personnel.
It's a very sad state of affairs. Obviously, one feels for Huw in hospital, and one also feels for his wife and family. So far, we have not had any denial, specific denial of the allegations raised against the person we now know as Huw Edwards by anybody, by his wife or anybody else. They've certainly said they're going to respond. So at the moment, it looks like it's, as indeed the Director General of the BBC said, legitimate public interest.
There will be questions to answer, but also consideration to a great broadcaster who has not been found to have broken the law, but is broken and needs some time and space to recover. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, as we've heard, Huw Edwards' wife has revealed he's in hospital with serious mental health issues, a subject which he has spoken openly about. He is a veteran presenter, a household name, who has fronted the BBC News for decades. Sajid Chowdhury has more.
Tonight at 10, record borrowing and tax rises.
For decades, it was the same Huw Edwards, a voice as flagship as the programme he presented, a face that welcomes you to the show, while somewhat frowning. Huw Edwards began his BBC career in 1984 as a news trainee.
Than the previous studio allowed us to do. It allows us to explain things.
Nearly 4 decades later, today, he's the organisation's highest paid journalist.
This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
Trusted to deliver the biggest stories to the nation. He's steered us through the bad times and the good.
Good evening. Boris Johnson has unveiled his so-called roadmap for the gradual lifting of the lockdown in England.
As a young reporter, he worked as the parliamentary correspondent for BBC Wales. He became the household name he is today when he moved to the 6 o'clock news. Professional, sharp and witty.
When I first heard a few days ago that it was likely to be Huw that was going to be the suspect, I was just completely taken aback. I've known him for more than 30 years as a friend and a colleague.
Behind the consistent news delivery, however, a different man. Huw Edwards opened up about his coping with severe depression. Other than that, he's kept his private life largely private. Now facing allegations of the most personal kind. The man who read us the news, the subject of it. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News, at the BBC in London.
Well, Jason joins me now. Shock tonight then for many, Jason. Concern too for Huw Edwards. But The Sun is handing over more allegations to the BBC, which now continues their own investigation.
Yeah, we started the day not being able to say the name, not knowing the severity of the allegations, and now we know that name. Now many people maybe didn't know the name, but a lot of people did, but it will come as a huge shock, the profile of this figure. And also the third revelation, that he is suffering from severe mental health problems, and that does shift the dynamic. So first of all, from The Sun, they've said they're not going to publish anything else, but they are going to hand over this dossier, which they could describe as a redacted dossier, which they say has serious and wide-ranging allegations, and some from BBC personnel. As for the BBC, the Director General put a memo out to staff saying, you know, it's been a difficult 5 days. It remains a very complex set of circumstances, he says, which we will navigate with care. He says, though, that it is important we now continue the fact-finding investigation. I think the other factor here is the way people perhaps responded when they first found out, back in May, in the internal staff, who this was and who the allegations. Were they in any way affected by the level of seniority of this person? Did that impact them, that they didn't go up, they didn't flag this up the chain? Because I think when the BBC looks back at this, even from the perspective of Huw Edwards, it would have been much better for people to know back in May than to be hit by this like a ton of bricks, seeing it on the front page of a tabloid newspaper.
Jason, thank you. The NATO summit came to an end today with members saying that Ukraine was closer than ever to becoming a member of the alliance. But amid the support was some tension in response to a question by Sky News. The UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said that Ukraine should show more gratitude for aid, adding that the UK is not an Amazon service for weapons. Well, NATO was established after the Second World War, but later expanded following the collapse of the Soviet Union. There were 12 original members in 1949, including the UK. They were joined by a further 18 countries between 1952 and 2020, including West Germany, which was admitted in 1955, while the country was still divided. Well, this year, Finland became the most recent member to join the alliance, abandoning its policy of military non-alignment. A major stumbling block for Sweden's application had been Turkey, which accuses the country of not doing enough against people it sees as terrorists. But this week, President Erdogan signalled a change in stance, leaving Ukraine. Well, NATO members say the country cannot join while still at war with Russia. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports now from the summit in Lithuania.
He was the UK's pick to be the next head of NATO. That's not to be, but the Defence Secretary still made headlines at a summit of allies. Speaking off-camera to journalists, he said he told Ukraine the UK was not an Amazon-style delivery service for weapons. Sky News asked the Ukrainian president about the remarks.
Ben Wallace also had some advice for Kyiv as you keep on asking for more and more weapons and support, and that was that people want to see gratitude. How do you respond to that? Do you think you're not being grateful enough?
I believe that we were always grateful to the UK. We were always grateful to the Prime Minister, or to Prime Ministers and the Minister of Defence, because the people in the United Kingdom have always supported Ukraine. We're grateful for this.
He asked his Defence Minister to extend some words of gratitude.
And you have to call him, please, today.
Ben Wallace wasn't being critical about a lack of gratitude. He was really making the point that Ukraine needs to think carefully about the political reality in certain countries where there are people that need persuading to keep up the support.
The Prime Minister seemed to distance himself from the comments.
I know President Zelensky has repeatedly expressed his gratitude to me and to the British people, and indeed other allies as well. He did it very movingly in Parliament when he was in the UK earlier this year.
Welcome to you, Vladimir. It's great to have you here.
Volodymyr Zelensky was welcomed by NATO for the first time as an equal. He wants full membership, but that's impossible while Ukraine's at war. Instead, allies meeting in the Lithuanian capital rallied around with new pledges of support.
When Putin and his craven lust for land and power unleashed his brutal war on Ukraine, he was betting NATO would break apart. He was betting NATO would break. He thought our unity would shatter at the first testing. He thought democratic leaders would be weak, but he thought wrong.
It's why what Britain's Defence Secretary says matters. He's ultimately warning about the very real risk of war fatigue and the need to stay strong. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Vilnius.
Sky's international correspondent John Sparks joins us live now from Dnipro in Ukraine. And John, questions of gratitude and shopping lists of military aid today. What response then from Ukraine, which believes it is fighting on behalf of NATO?
Yeah, good evening, Anna. I mean, Ben Wallace's intervention really became one of the big stories of this summit. The sirens are going off here in Dnipro. But, you know, Zelensky is demanding. His expectations are high, and there are huge expectations on his shoulders. And you have to remember that a lot of people here in Ukraine think they're doing the job of NATO as we speak. They are fighting the Russians on the eastern border of Europe. So why not just make us a member of NATO because we're doing the job already. That's how the argument goes. But I think Zelensky realizes that he's got to stay in with his main suppliers of weapons and aid. He's got to stay in with the leaders of these countries, with the US, with the UK, and the electorate as well, the public who elect these leaders, if he wants the aid and the supplies to flow long term. So if Ben Wallace wants gratitude, if he wants thanks, he will get it, and he has got it. And the Ukrainians were thanking Joe Biden and the Americans as well for the billions of dollars of aid that they have supplied. It is a matter of national survival for the Ukrainians.
Well, amid those sirens, John Sparks, thank you. Asylum seekers have begun arriving at a former RAF base in Essex. Ministers unveiled plans in March to use Wethersfield Airfield to accommodate more than 1,500 male asylum seekers for up to 180 days each to try to reduce the amount the government spends on hotels. Well, the scheme has led to a backlash from the local authority and from some residents. Sky's communities correspondent Lisa Holland has been taking a look at the site.
The first 50 asylum seekers to be housed at the former airbase at Wethersfield in Essex crossed the Channel by small boat over the weekend. They were brought here straight from processing centres in Kent. Earlier, cameras were unusually allowed to film the facilities inside. This is where asylum seekers will sleep, 2 or 3 to a room, where they will be provided with 3 meals a day and snacks. The gym and sports facilities they can use to occupy their time. The government's message, using surplus military sites like this is cheaper for taxpayers than costly hotels. The Home Office says asylum seekers will have everything they need on site and won't burden the resources of local communities. But in what appears to be an acknowledgement of the upset and concerns felt by some locals when asylum seekers first arrive, they'll also be given instructions on how to be good neighbours.
Everybody who arrives here goes through an orientation process to understand what acceptable behaviour is. We know that they've been through quite a lengthy journey and they're in a new environment, and it's important that they understand how to fit in and be part of the community and minimise any impact.
In the quintessentially English villages near to the base, they fought hard to prevent this day from happening. A legal challenge to the plan is continuing through the courts. Many people here say the intended number of 1,700 asylum seekers at the base by the autumn will overwhelm their communities.
A mixture of disappointment, fear amongst some, because the messages coming from the government and our own Home Secretary are so flawed, so mixed. The reassurances given by the Home Office are simply not good enough or reassuring enough for these communities.
Those who work with asylum seekers also oppose the move.
We should be treating them with humanity and dignity, welcoming them into our communities like we did with refugees from Ukraine, rather than warehousing them in former military barracks in the middle of nowhere, where it's wholly inappropriate to place them.
This is the first of a number of large sites the government wants to repurpose to house asylum seekers. It will need others if the promise to reduce small boat channel crossings remains unfulfilled. Lisa Holland, Sky News, Essex.
The Bank of England is warning that nearly 1 million UK mortgage holders will see their monthly repayments jump by £500 over the next 3 years. Higher interest rates and inflation staying stubbornly high are fueling the rise. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has more.
Mortgage costs, they're going up. But just how much? Well, the Bank of England has done some work on this. It's quite interesting. It's showing you, it's kind of breaking down over the course of the coming months how many households, so the bars are showing numbers of households, are facing relatively small increases, pretty big increases, and very big increases in their monthly mortgage payments. That's going through to the end of 2023. Just look at what happens afterwards. So going through to 2026, if you add all of that up, that is nearly 1 million households facing an increase of more than £500, well, 500 or more a month, so £6,000 or more a year. It just gives you a sense of the scale of what's being faced. Some people facing even bigger increases than that. Raising a question, what does this mean for the overall financial system? Well, have a look at this. This is showing you the percentage of households, so the higher that is, the bigger the proportion of households who face really high debts at the moment, basically debts that are worth about 70% of your income. Those were really high at the time of the financial crisis. The interesting thing, and quite striking here, given how high interest rates are, is this. This line is still quite low, and even if interest rates go up a fair bit in the next few months, the Bank of England thinks it's still a long way shy of where it was back at the financial crisis. So a little bit of good news there, although it all, of course, depends on what happens to interest rates. If they go up a lot, then that could well change, and that depends on this other line. It depends on inflation. So much comes back to this. This actually is US inflation. Again, the higher the line is, the faster the rate of prices going up. And look, the latest data has just come in. It's actually showed that's coming down. It's close to normal levels, about 3% in the US. Look at the Eurozone, that's also coming down. But here's the odd one out. Look, the UK, unfortunately, still very high inflation. Kind of went along up with everyone else and stubbornly high at 8.7%. And now everything ultimately depends on what happens to that red line. Does it come down in the future? That will have a big bearing on interest rates and pretty much everything.
Ed Conway there. Now, Europe is expected to swelter in record-breaking temperatures this week. In some areas, temperatures are due to peak 10 to 15 degrees higher than the seasonal average. Sky's climate change correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter reports now from Athens.
Yes, please. The England rugby team training through punishing temperatures in Italy, using the uncomfortable conditions to better prepare for the World Cup. It's a different pace at this beach outside Athens, but the same relentless sunshine. Most of southern Europe now in the grip of a heatwave.
We've got really dangerously high temperatures in parts of the Mediterranean, extremely high. And we're also seeing very high temperatures in parts of Europe that don't really often deal with high temperatures at all. It's very early in the season. We would expect temperatures to increase as we go further through the year. And higher temperatures are associated not just with impacts on people and infrastructure, but also on increased risk of wildfires.
The dark red on this weather map is a warning of what's ahead. With temperatures set to reach 41 degrees in the south of Spain and Italy, that's 6 degrees above normal for this time of year. Average temperatures in Europe, driven by climate change, have risen over 2 degrees compared to the second half of the 19th century. That's twice the global rate.
This sort of pressure pattern is increasing in likelihood because of climate change. We also know that there's an increase in intensity, frequency and duration of extreme heat events across Europe. We could see temperatures reaching the late 40s across Italy, Spain and Portugal in the coming days.
In Greece, it's so hot this week that working and opening hours might be changed to cope.
Here in Athens, they are well used to the heat, but taking this weather event very seriously, urging residents and visitors to stay indoors if possible and opening cooling centres for those who don't have air conditioning.
And all this just as summer holidays begin. Earlier in July, the world recorded its hottest week ever. Scientists say it's the shape of things to come. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News in Athens.
Go live to the Greek capital and speak to Hannah. These temperatures then prompting real fears about people's health now, Hannah.
Yes, I'll just give you an idea, Anna. People are outside now taking advantage of the slightly cooler temperatures. It's the middle of the night in Athens and it's still nearly 30 degrees and it will stay that way. And so there's very little relief for the people here, and that's when heat can get really dangerous. And it's why authorities in Greece have decided to name this heat wave. They've called it Heatwave Cleon, acknowledging the severe temperatures as the US might acknowledge a hurricane. Is a public health strategy asking people to engage with the potential threat posed by extended extreme heat. It's why they're thinking about reducing the hours available for residents and for tourists to go and visit key historical sites. And it's why they are opening those cooling centres to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to cool down, even if they don't have air conditioning at home. The residents of Athens are very well used to severe heat events, but it's these kinds of temperatures that make ordinary life for otherwise healthy and fit individuals very difficult indeed.
Thank you. A 15-year-old boy has appeared in court over the stabbing of a teacher in Gloucestershire. The teenager, who cannot be named for legal reasons, pleaded not guilty to attempted wounding with intent, but did admit to possession of a bladed article. Jamie Sansom suffered a single stab wound at Tewkesbury Academy on Monday morning. Members of the NESUWT Teaching Union have voted to stage industrial action from September onwards. The union says a recommended 6.5% pay rise is the minimum it would accept. But the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has warned that the government will make sure any public sector pay awards do not fuel inflation. And the NHS is preparing for the start of a 5-day strike by junior doctors, the longest walkout in the history of the health service. Members of the BMA in England will begin their action at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning and are not expected to return to work until next Tuesday. The water regulator Ofwat says it's confident that Thames Water shareholders will provide enough funding to stave off special administration by the government. But today, a hearing of the Environment Committee was told by Thames Water that although water prices are regulated until next year, customers may have to foot the bill for essential improvements. Now, for decades, children have been playing with Barbie and Ken dolls, role-playing their seemingly perfect lives. But that perfection is being challenged in a live-action movie starring Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling. Well, the film had its London premiere this evening. Our entertainment reporter, Claire Gregory, was on the pink carpet, a warning her report does contain flashing images.
Barbie, you're beautiful. From when she first hit shelves back in 1959, Barbie has had more than 100 careers. An astronaut before man set foot on the moon, a teacher, a doctor, a footballer. But she's also courted controversy, often criticised for promoting unrealistic body standards to young girls. So why would Oscar-nominated actress Margot Robbie, who's proven she's not just a pretty face, want to walk in her shoes?
Barbie Land feels like a female utopia, but you do, by the end of the film, see the flaw in that. I mean, a hierarchy in anyone's power is not necessarily the best thing. So, but it is fun.
It's hard to quantify the popularity of Barbie. Her enduring nature is something most other brands can only marvel at. 64 years after she first arrived, she continues to pull in big sales for makers Mattel. During filming, there were reports of the toy makers trying to control the narrative, butting heads with filmmaker Greta Gerwig. Was that true?
I mean, I honestly can't believe they let us make this movie. But they were really brave, and they really allowed us to, have creative freedom with their beloved brands.
Playing Ken, Ryan Gosling did this movie for his daughters.
All things Barbie landed in my house at the same time. Barbie the doll and also the film. So it was kind of it was just sort of like a Barbie avalanche.
Gloriously camp to look at, and while doubters question whether it'd be a load of rubbish, those who've seen it are saying it's rather good. Arguably a problem that's plagued poor Barbie her whole life, people underestimating her. Claire Gregory, Sky News.
Well, to Wimbledon and top seed Carlos Alcaraz reached the semi-finals for the first time at SW19. The Spaniard at the top of the screen beat Denmark's Holger Rune in straight sets, now faces Daniil Medvedev on Friday for a place in the final. And fan favourite Ons Jabeur is through to the women's semi-finals after knocking out defending champion Elina Rybakina, who beat her in last year's final. She now plays second seed Anya Sabalenka in the last four. Well, enjoying all the action on centre court was Queen Camilla, who even revealed she was a ball girl at the Queen's Club tournament back when she was younger. In fact, she made more of a joke than that, I think, probably, didn't she? Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this on the front page of the Metro, which announces, after days of speculation and rumour about the man at the centre of the BBC presenter allegations, it is Huw Edwards. Well, tonight, we're joined here in the studio, as you can see, by the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail columnist, Sarah Vine. Back in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. The BBC newsreader, Huw Edwards, has been named as the presenter accused of paying a teenager for explicit photos. The Prime Minister has rowed back on comments by the Defence Secretary that Ukraine should show more gratitude for Western weapons, saying President Zelensky has repeatedly said how grateful he is. And asylum seekers have begun arriving at a former RAF base in Essex, which is being used to house them. Well, hello there, you are watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see then what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail columnist, Sarah Vine, who are with us here in the studio. Welcome, and lovely to see you both.
Good to see you, Anna.
As ever, front pages, let us take a look at what is leading. In response to today's developments over the suspended BBC presenter, the Metro declares it is Huw Edwards. The Daily Star pictures the presenter and his wife, who was the person who named him, with the headline, "It's Huw." The Express, too, says she named him and adds that at this point, police do not think he has committed any crime. The Eye quotes his wife Vicky's statement, too, that he's in hospital under mental care and asking for privacy for the family from now on. There's more from her statement on the front of Sarah's paper, the Daily Mail. This is the front of The Guardian. Huw Edwards named as the BBC presenter at the centre of allegations. Huw Edwards is also the lead story on the front of tomorrow's Daily Telegraph, and The Times also makes it their top item too. So too, Kevin's paper, the Daily Mirror, BBC star Huw's in hospital. And away from that story, the Financial Times leads with a big fall in inflation in the United States, unlike in the UK, which has raised hopes that higher interest rates there are working, in the States, that is. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So let's head to our guests then, Kevin Maguire and Sarah Vine. And lovely to have you in person with us, I have to say. So, the extraordinary news today that it is Huw Edwards. Let's not forget there'll be large parts of the country who are deeply shocked by this. The man who has fronted the BBC, who has, been the voice of those key state occasions, which are, integral to the public psyche. A great deal of shock, and now concern for him too, Kevin.
Yeah, I would have thought an incredible amount of shock for some people. Now, of course, a significant minority of people knew, read it on social media, but there'll be a large number who didn't. And he was the voice of the nation on big occasions, on coronations, the Queen's death, state openings of Parliament, other occasions, and an incredible broadcaster. He's kind of the Dimbleby of this era. Yeah. Saw on News at 10 regularly, very authoritative. He's got a lot of other interests, including the chapels of South Wales. He wrote a book on them. He does a lot of public appearances, and there we are. As the Express, Huw Edwards' wife names him as star in BBC Scandal. I think she's done the right thing.
I mean, I think she's done the right thing because actually she's put a lot of people out of their misery because, of course, Twitter and social media was alive with all these other names, which was actually horrible. I mean, all these presenters at the BBC had their names trending on Twitter alongside all sorts of terrible trolling, which was really bad. I mean, that for me really highlights the difference between social media and, old school media. None of our papers, none of the newspapers named him until she has come forth and named him. But I think Jeremy Vine and all that lot who've had an awful few days will be quite relieved. And the BBC didn't really handle it very well, I don't think. They didn't do anything. They didn't say, it's not these guys. They just sort of were paralysed like rabbits in the headlights. So it's been a really awful few days for a lot of people because, of course, being accused of this kind of thing is not great. I mean, the police have said that Scotland Yard has said there's no case to be investigated. There's no criminality happening here. But the question, I think, for lots of people is the sort of morality of it, really. That he's got 4 accusations against him. It's not just this young person whose parents took a complaint. It's also an accusation of breaking lockdown, I think, and then another person who sort of says that something happened.
Yeah, I think the appropriateness of his behaviour is a legitimate public interest.
Well, that was going to be a question. So if the police come out and say no crime has been committed, does that actually shape whether the Sun should have published in the first place, or is there enough to go at in public interest, as you were about to say, without that prospect?
It's because of the expansion of privacy law, defamation law is there too. Is it truthful? Privacy law is what can you say about public figures. I believe the media should be able to hold very powerful public figures to account in their behaviour, and from what we've seen alleged, I believe it was legitimate to run the story in the Sun on Huw Edwards. Now, where they may have erred is by saying the contact with the persons said to have been providing explicit images for £35,000, and he's a cocaine addict, was 17. Because if that was happening when he was 17, that is an offence. Now, that does not seem to be the case. Now, the Sun say we didn't allege it, but they certainly inferred it by putting 17. I think it was the Sunday Times that first said it was actually a criminal offence in an analysis piece. But I think I can see when they were constructing a public interest case for doing this story, and they would know what privacy law is like. They would also know the law of defamation, which is why they didn't name him. They would have been weighing it up very, very carefully.
I mean, I suppose it's
carefully with their lawyers.
It's similar to the Philip Schofield case, really, isn't it? I mean, I don't think there are any criminal charges there, are there?
No. As Philip Schofield said, it wasn't illegal, but he was unwise.
Exactly. So it's the same sort of thing. It's not illegal. Yeah. Well, we don't think it's illegal, but it's definitely not wise, and it's not something that you would expect a person of Huw Edwards' stature to do. You know,
I could hear some people would be shouting now, look, it's his private life. Why does that matter? I think the behaviour of somebody
if an MP was doing it, you would feel.
Then you would say it was a lawmaker. But I think somebody who acts as the voice of the nation at the BBC, the fact he is 61 and some of these people are in their early 20s, you don't have to be a great prude
the BBC is taxpayer funded.
Inappropriate, yes, and the use of money and the power relationship incredibly unequal.
Well, Adam Walton, our former political editor, said those who hold people to account need to be held account themselves. Obviously, we wait to see what his statement is. His wife alluding to the fact that after he is better, he will answer those allegations. Nobody knows the veracity of it. We certainly cannot confirm any of them. It's in the hands of the BBC and, at the moment, the Sun. Now, the Sun saying, we're not going to publish anymore, but we've got more. I mean, they're still making their case that they were justified in what they did, presumably. Is that the point of that?
I mean, I think so. They're obviously trying to justify their story in the first place, aren't they?
Yeah, but I would have thought if they have more, now they say they have more, right? If they have more, when he's been admitted to hospital in a serious way, then I think it would be cruel, and the public backlash would be enormous. If you just began, I don't know what they have here, but if it was, say, we've got person number 5, 6, 7, 8, what would that achieve?
He has spoken about having depression, over the last 2 decades. He's obviously somebody who's had mental health issues, so of course, that does need to be taken into account.
Yes, and your public persona, can be difficult to marry with your private life if you have some sort of internal conflict as well, as we know.
Yeah,
so, we don't know what's going on there.
Well, I've read many, Vicky Flind, a very respected journalist, his wife, we don't know what she knew about his behaviour or his children knew, but he's given many...
Alleged behaviour.
Alleged behaviour, yes. No, you're right, for the alleged behaviour.
But I feel very sorry for them. That must be very tough for those 5 children. And
but he has spoken about his family in interviews, because I've read it. But he's not... his life, I think it's John Sopel, one of his former colleagues, said it was more complicated than... maybe we were led to believe.
So we see The Guardian there, the Telegraph also picturing Huw Edwards in his normal, News at 10 seat, if you like, the broadcaster being treated for serious mental health issues amid alleged sex scandal. As the Met says, it found no evidence of criminal offence. So that's the sort of nuts and bolts of it. The Eye as well, Huw Edwards in hospital for mental health care, says his wife. And they say the Sun faces scrutiny over its story and says it has no plans to publish further allegations, which we've talked about. But are you surprised we saw no hard evidence, if you like, from the Sun? First, and secondly, have questions about what they put out and what stories are done in a tabloid newsroom changed after the privacy laws that a judge created now, after Sir Cliff Richard and others, And even cases like Caroline Flack as well.
Yeah.
You're in tabloid.
I mean, I'm a great believer that you're innocent until proven guilty, and I think that should be the basic principle by which everybody operates. And I really hate these sort of, Twitter pylons where people get judged. That you should not be judged by the media. That's not fair and that's not right. So I would surmise that the reason that the Sun haven't actually presented the evidence is because initially they wanted to, but they couldn't reveal his identity anyway. And in order to present the evidence, they would, that would have in itself revealed his identity.
Yeah, there are issues we still can't discuss legally about why they didn't name him because of the nature of the relationship with the people he was said to be corresponding with and paying money with, said to be. But I am surprised that if money was being transferred and the Sun said £35,000, they didn't produce any evidence of that. We didn't see a bank statement or a PayPal transfer, somehow redacted, so you don't see the account numbers. I've always felt uncomfortable that we only have their account of what the mother and the stepfather said, that they haven't appeared elsewhere in the media. Now, I can see why you can't reveal their identity, because if you do that, you then reveal the identity of the 20-year-old who may be a victim.
Well, the young person did actually say, he did actually issue a statement, didn't he, saying that the allegations were rubbish?
Yeah, well, if we go on to that, the Sun, if he contacted the Sun on the Friday evening or Friday night via WhatsApp, I believe, and said it's rubbish, why wasn't that included in the story? Who did he WhatsApp? I mean, because there may be a reason for that. If somebody gives you a denial, it doesn't mean the story isn't true. You've got to weigh it up.
So if there are questions for the Sun, as we are alluding to, questions for the BBC, and certainly Tim Davie yesterday was asked if you dealt with this more swiftly, you wouldn't necessarily have seen the story on the front page of the tabloid, because the child's parents always said they just wanted it to stop, didn't they? One for the question, but also questions for social media. And if you half hinted a story with an unnamed celebrity person, then you know social media is going to fill in the gaps. So actually, would it be better to wait and do the full story than leave this sort of the hanging emptiness, which is filled by speculation and social media now?
Well, I think social media is a really interesting thing because it doesn't have the same rules and regulations that the mainstream press have, because they don't consider themselves to be publishers. They consider themselves to be platforms for other people's views. So they effectively take no responsibility for what people say. So it's very difficult to enforce any form of privacy on social media. Absolutely impossible. But in terms of the sort of general kind of, I mean, the Sun would have decided to publish because they would have been worried that the story would have got out somehow, and then they would have lost the sort of advantage of actually being the people who broke the story. Don't you think that's what probably would have been going through their minds?
I would like to know their thinking on that, actually, and I'm sure the Culture Committee in the House of Commons, the MPs, will have their own investigation in due course. Can't be before the summer because they break up for their holes on Thursday next week. But I'm sure they will do it. And these are all, look, as a journalist and dealing with lawyers, and all the debates you have on ethics, is it right, or legal positions, they will have had all those debates. They won't have just said, right, publish and be damned.
But also
it just isn't like that.
The BBC will have felt that they had a duty of care towards Huw Edwards, because we know that he's had a history of mental illness. He's been depressed for, he's talked about his depression. They would have thought, who are these people? Are they real? Is this a real thing? We need to check that. We need to do our due diligence. And of course, I know that they had the information. I think it was the 18th of May. I could be at some point. But it takes time to verify those sorts of things. So everyone's shouting at the BBC. I don't think they handled it brilliantly, but I can understand why they didn't immediately move.
Tim Davie, the Director General, has admitted their processes aren't right and failed, and they'll review them, and you need to be red flagged. But I think it would have almost been impossible to keep this incident from the front page, because if somebody walks in or emails you and says one of your star presenters, one of the best-known journalists in the country, has been behaving inappropriately, you can't just say, right, well, tell him to stop. Then the BBC would be part of some type of cover-up. They would have had to act in some firmer way.
Yes, and this, the Metro, and in fact the Daily Star, which we'll see afterwards, alluding to the fact that many people already knew or had guessed by the fact he was not on News at 10. But one final thought about the BBC, who are now doing their own investigation. You know, are they losing political capital about their own survival each time there is an incident like this, or should it be deemed completely separate because this is somebody's private life? What do you think?
I think their reaction to it loses them political capital. I don't think, you know, they can't be held responsible for what people do in their private lives. They don't control that. But I think they have to put in place processes that are better and more fluid and better oiled.
I've heard people on the left already say, look, the son owned by Rupert Murdoch hates the BBC. They've done this to damage the BBC. I think the BBC is bruised by this. It's not as battered as it has been by some other instances. And this isn't Rolf Harris. It isn't Jimmy Savile. Or Stuart Hall.
They were
that was
criminal.
clear,
It was criminal
clear
stuff.
criminality.
Okay.
In that. This is not good when your star news presenter is in hospital.
The problem is that social media changes everything because it blows everything up, it amplifies everything. I mean, for example, you know, all those presenters' names were trending alongside the hashtag nonce. You know, that is not great.
The Leveson report 12 years ago into the press, I think it was 2 paragraphs on social, just two paragraphs.
OK, we will move on. You know, nobody comes out of it, you know, without questions.
Oh, no.
And, you know, without their own difficulties, I suppose. That's the point, isn't it? Stay there. Lots more still to come, including should Ukraine show more gratitude for Western weapons? Talk about that in just a moment.
I'm Hannah Thomas-Peter, and I'm Sky's climate change correspondent. The UK is a world leader in wind power. Power! Power! People! It's part of the Congo Basin rainforest, which is such an important ecosystem. It's known as the lungs of Africa. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. She doesn't really enjoy speaking to the press, and it wasn't clear right up until the last moment that she was going to sit down with me.
I might be just very naive, but I do believe that change is possible, otherwise we wouldn't be climate activists.
I'm confident for the last 30 years we have known how bad it is. I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to fight for the next step.
You can see just the piles and piles of stuff, these sofas and people's desks and children's books. And you can see inside this home here, people trying to sort out their home. It's just been devastating.
I think everything's at stake. The future of our planet, the future of the beauty around us, the future of you and me.
welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Kevin Maguire and Sarah Vine from the Mirror and the Mail, respectively. Welcome back to both of you. NATO summit has been underway in Lithuania. Ben Wallace, the UK Defence Secretary, causing quite a stir, suggesting that Zelensky, who was angry, as we know, yesterday about whether he would be given a timetable to join, was ungrateful for the military list that he kept demanding of people, Sarah.
Yeah, and treating the Allies like Amazon delivery for armaments. I mean, I think it's slightly colourful language there from Ben Wallace. And then, of course, Rishi has now rode back on that quite significantly and said that, you know, Zelensky's always shown a lot of gratitude, particularly recently when he came to Parliament and did a very moving thing. So I think Ben Wallace has gone a bit off the reservation there, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's known as being tetchy, even by his own staff, and it's one of the reasons he was never in the real running for the NATO Secretary-General job, because they all know he's got a short fuse. I've always thought Zelensky is pretty grateful. He always thanks allies.
Well, he's always doing
getting
this
a lot of
the whole
support.
time. He's always doing this.
He's always doing that.
Hilarious picture on the front page of The Guardian, which looks like it's either been photoshopped or, as someone pointed out to me earlier, like the worst rom-com you've ever seen, like an advert for the worst rom-com you've ever seen.
That must be the only gathering where Macron isn't the short.
I know. It's made him taller.
Yes, we haven't got very long. I'm going to see if I can get through both of them. Anyway, very, very quickly, the public sector pay awards, we're expecting to hear from the review bodies, no new money. That's a problem, isn't it? Don't you think?
Would need 3. Well, we think they're going to recommend 6%, which you know, as your regular viewers may remember, Kevin and I had already sorted out. We'd already decided that was the right number.
Nothing you decided.
To do that, they'd have to borrow another $3 billion, which is a big lot of money. So that would, I mean, you know, whether it would have a direct impact on inflation, but just borrowing the money would have a direct impact on inflation.
Yeah, but if public sector pay rises aren't really inflationary, because we don't pay for health and education, so they don't put up the prices to recoup the money. You can say there's broader demand in the economy. You can argue that, but if you don't fund those services, how can they pay it?
Yeah, and can you see the NHS cutting back elsewhere in order to fund it? No. Running out of time to talk about that anymore. Sarah Vine and Kevin Maguire, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you.